John and Barry, that was awesome. Folks, if I could ask you to keep your seats and just give us 10 more minutes, because if what Barry and John were talking about resonated with you, you got to hear who's about to speak next and tell you. I want him and our special guest to tell you a little bit about a really important new movement organization that I was asked to serve on the board of. I think many of my fellow board members of this organization are here. It's called Allies for a Strong Canada. It's a very important organization, one that I'm very proud to be on the board of and supporting. And a lot of people get up here and they say, oh, my friend so-and-so, I want to introduce my friend. This guy actually happens to be my best friend of 25 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Westcott, the CEO of Allies for a Strong Canada.
You didn't hear that, but I just turned to him and said, you can't stop me now. He is my best friend, unquestionably, and I have the best job tonight. I cannot see any of you. These lights are so bright. I have the best job tonight, and I'll tell you why. I get to embarrass my best friend for a few seconds here. I get to talk about what I do, and I love what I do. But most importantly, I get to introduce you to one of my friends and a true Canadian hero, and I'm really excited to do that. First of all, to my friend Adam, what an amazing event. What unbelievable turnout, what unbelievable growth CSFN has had under your leadership. I know I'm embarrassing him, and I don't care, because this is my opportunity to say all the things that I want to say to him, and he never lets me. So please take a moment and just thank my friend Adam when you have a minute over the next couple of days. I get to run this unbelievable organization called Allies for a Strong Canada, and I will tell you why it makes me so happy. Because every day I get to meet new people from across the country who care about our shared values, who care about standing up and speaking out for them, who see what happens on the streets of our cities when we let those values fall down, who see what happens when, as Barry and John just discussed, what happens when you let people who glorify terrorists have their moment in the spotlight and make that okay. And I know the hardest part when we're together in a room like this is to think that we're small and they're big. They're not. We actually represent the majority view on this stuff. Most Canadians see what's going on in our country. They hate it. They think it's disgusting. They think it's abhorrent that people will stand up and burn our flags and say death to Canada and death to Israel, and behind their hands, death to the Jews. I am so proud to stand up in front of you and talk about Allies for a Strong Canada, because our job is to stand up for those values and stand with our friends in the Jewish community. If you want to do something, if you want to get into this fight, come and check us out. We have a booth here in the hall. Our website is theallies.ca. We will help you get into this fight. And my friends, in this room, I don't have to explain this to you. We are all movement people here, but this is an organization that goes right across the country, and we are helping people get involved every single day. And I think the most important thing you need to understand about what we do is Canadians, no one, again, please forgive me, because it does not apply to a single person in this room. Canadians don't self-mobilize. We are not a group of people that just instantly kind of come together around issues. We need leadership. We need moral leadership. We need lighthouses. And this allows me to introduce you to my very good friend, who has been a beacon of moral leadership for the Canadian public ever since October the 7th of 2023. He has stood up in public, he stood up in the media, he's been incredibly active on social media, calling out this hatred and encouraging Canadians to stand up and stand together against it. My good friend, General Rick Hillier. General Hillier, thank you very much. General Hillier, who gave 35 years of his life to putting on a uniform, picking up a gun, and defending our country. It took him to some of the darkest corners of the world. He rose to be chief of the defense staff, and he's advised prime ministers on the best ways to secure our country and secure our borders and make all of us safe. One of the things I greatly respect the most about him is he understands that what drives our country is a set of values. And it's those values that made each of our families at some point in our lives say, that looks like a good place to live. That looks like a place where my family can be safe, can prosper, can do well. And that's so incredibly important, because right now there are people in our country who don't feel safe anymore, who literally get up before the sun rises, they check their phones to make sure it's safe to take their children to school. If that horrifies you and that disgusts you, but you don't know what to do, please come and check out our organization, and please join me in welcoming my great friend and one of my personal heroes, General Rick Hillier.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you.
Michael, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I apologize that it's a little bit later than you probably wanted, and me also. I know that Barry mentioned their scholarship here, so pandering on and taking exactly that, I brought one piece of paper I'm going to show. It's the General Hillier Valor and Service Scholarship. We launched it on Monday in Edmonton at Macamee College, $1 million over 3 years for our veterans, our serving soldiers, aviators, and sailors, and their family members. And we are going to start handing those scholarships out to those in need and deserve them this coming spring and summer. Macamee College has a booth right out there. We want to bring it to $3 million. If you want to visit and just get a chance to talk to Eric and Daniela, who are there, about that scholarship, please do. It was great to see John Baird. John was minister when I was the Chief of Defense Staff, and we spent one memorable Christmas visiting our soldiers in Afghanistan, visiting Canada's sons and daughters who, 12,000 kilometers from home, were doing what we asked them to do with incredible courage and putting their life on the line, and some of them, in fact, leaving it. We came back just after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's Eve in 2007. I got back to my home and I heard on the news we're having a change of ministers in the government of Canada. It didn't involve the Minister of Defense, so I just kind of cocked an ear to it. The day after New Year's Day, I was called over to Meech Lake for a cabinet meeting. I walked into the outer sort of room there and waiting to go in and talk on the issues that we were going to be there to talk about. And there was John Baird, who was right up to me and said, "General, I got the news to come in to talk to the Prime Minister, and I was so excited. I thought I was going to become the Minister of National Defense, and I was so excited because I wanted to work with those men and women and help them out. And instead, he said, I became the Minister of Environment." And I said, "John, you know what my first thought was?" He said, "No, General, what was it?" I said, "How come I waste a fucking trip to Afghanistan on the Minister of the Environment?" So I think he was a little crestfallen after that, but there you go. He's been a good friend for a long time. Now, I'm sure this has already been used here, and you're already in you with it, but I'm going to risk and say it again here. What an incredible day to start this conference, right? As we talk about Canada. This is the Battle of Vimy Ridge, 108th anniversary. What an incredible day. I wore my Vimy tie here, ladies and gentlemen, just to make sure I remember to speak to you about it. And just think back on that 9 April 1917 morning when 100,000 Canadians, 100,000, just think of those numbers, sons of Canada, in 4 divisions, emerged from the tunnels, came out of the slit trenches and the shell scrapes, and picked up and under fire in a driving snowstorm, through the barbed wire, through the shell scrapes, into the water, artillery bursting amongst them, and went up Vimy Ridge in northern France. And they did that and did something that had been tried for 2 years by other countries and had not been done. They went across and over and sometimes on the bodies of those who had preceded them in months and the several years prior to that. And in 8 hours, they took most of Vimy Ridge, and over the next several days solidified their stand there against counterattacks from the Germans, and left a mark in history. And people say that Canada became a nation that day. I don't necessarily think it's exactly true, but it certainly became a defining moment for our country, because those men, 100,000 of them went up, supported by another 70,000 firing artillery and doing the logistics and the medical care and the command and control and all those things, supported them from the rear, and they did it with courage, first of all. And sometimes we had to be reminded that it takes courage to actually accomplish real great things in life. And they did it with a view that service to a cause greater than themselves as individuals was something actually worth doing. And they did it sometimes at the sacrifice and the giving of their own lives. 3,000 and almost 600 soldiers gave their lives that day in the attack on Vimy Ridge. 10,000 wounded, and when you go to Vimy Ridge now, and if you haven't, you should. That should be your pilgrimage as a Canadian. You see the bodies, you see the cemeteries with all of the markers surrounding Vimy Ridge, with all the bodies of those young men who were killed on that day, sacrificing themselves for us. And they did it by becoming a learning and innovative organization. And if you're a corporate leader, and if you're a government leader, you should actually go back and study Vimy, the Canadian Corps at Vimy, because it succeeded not just because of that courage, not just because of that sacrifice, but because they became a learning organization and they understood what had happened in the previous 2 years of war. They turned that into ways to change the way they operated. They changed the way they trained to prepare for those operations that were different, and then they trained in that manner, and as a consequence, they did something, as I said, that no other nation could do. And the innovation that they brought in terms of fire support and fire and movement and all those things, we still use today in military tactics. But they also brought, for Canadians, they brought a ruthlessness that was quite incredible. When those 70,000 people firing artillery that day were busy, they fired more than 400,000 artillery rounds onto the enemy at Vimy Ridge. Half of those rounds were poison gas rounds. We don't use poison gas in warfare. It's against international law, against the Geneva Conventions. The Canadians were the brunt of the first poison attack by the Germans in April of 1915 in Ypres. They fired gas rounds then. And as Arthur Currie, probably the greatest leader our nation has ever produced, said after the war when asked, "What did you think about the enemy?" He said, "We hated them all, and if we'd had an opportunity, we would have killed them all." They brought a ruthlessness which is necessary to accomplish great things at time. Not in that manner of killing people. We don't want to be back doing that, but a ruthlessness to be focused on their mission. And because of their courage and sacrifice and their innovation and their learning, they brought to Canada a confidence that we could do anything. They brought to us, I think, a leadership. 400,000 Canadian soldiers served overseas out of a population of 7 million, another 300,000 in Canada in uniform. They learned how to lead, and they understood that leading gave Canada a place on that world stage. And at the end of World War II, Canada, as an independent country, a sovereign nation, signed the Treaty of Versailles because of the service, the sacrifice, and the leadership of those incredible Canadians. And they realized, those young Canadians, they realized that it didn't matter who you were, didn't matter even, in fact, the color of your skin or the language you spoke. What mattered was what you did and what you could do. And equality in capability and merit was crucial, and building teams from people who could actually do things became the hallmark of the Canadian Corps. And what they accomplished led to the attack on Hill 70 and another victory, led to the horrible fighting and then victory at Passchendaele, and led to the last 100 days and the Canadian Corps taking on almost half the German army to end World War I. We should cheer today on Vimy Day. We should remember all of those Canadians, including the 66,000 who gave their lives during that war. And we should take the values that they left us, take the nation they left us, and build them with the pride that they had. When they first arrived in France, the German soldiers said of the Canadians, they were lions led by sheep. In very short order, we changed that. And it was guys like Richard Turner, Victoria Cross winner, and Arthur Currie, who I mentioned earlier, who were the lions. And shortly after Vimy Ridge, it was the Germans saying, they're lions led by lions. And I'll come back to that here in a couple of minutes at the end of my very few remarks here. Ladies and gentlemen, I spoke here at this conference almost exactly 6 years ago. And it was late in the afternoon at the end of a full day, as opposed to, if you will, early in the evening starting one off. And I said a couple of things, or one thing with two pieces to it, that got me a little tiny bit of criticism after the fact. And I said during that talk that my country, Canada, our great nation, Canada, is being viewed internationally as a nation who cannot do anything, internationally or domestically. And internationally, we were not meeting our NATO commitments. We were operationally poor. We weren't executing operations, and we couldn't seem to get our mind around how we were going to do them. It took us 3 years to put together what was ostensibly a peacekeeping operation in a little country called Mali, somewhere in Africa, where Canadian interests and values were what we never could figure out. It took us 3 years to put it together. But we excelled internationally in the opposite of what our special forces credos are. And we had words, not deeds. And if words could have been accomplishments, and if words could have been ammunition and tanks and fighter airplanes and ships, we would have had the best equipped armed forces in the world, and we would have stood tall on the international stage. Domestically, we also were unable, it seemed, to accomplish anything. Our defense languished, and we created, in fact, I think, the decade of despair. I used the term way back when, a decade of darkness, and I'm told that now it's even worse. even worse than it was during that decade of darkness. And we created that because we did not pay attention to our knitting. We did not pay attention to our defense. We have not paid attention to the Arctic. We've talked about it. We've visited it for photo opportunities, and we have not done it. We have not actually taken actions there. Again, more words, not deeds. And we have left our resources untapped. This rich, awesome nation, and we've left our resources untapped. And you know, we communicated weakness around the world because of that, because we were perceived as not being able to do anything. That decade of despair led to the Five Eyes, effectively becoming Three Eyes as we got left behind. Division across Canada became the hallmark, I think, of what people saw, not our strength of unity. Crime soared and still does, and troubles me greatly. And most importantly, what I saw was the hatred that was exploding in our nation, every single place across the country, and appeared to be undisciplined and unconstrained. That weakness has been telegraphed in a changed and changing world. The U.S., number one, with Donald Trump as the president, has pivoted to China. If you think anything else but that, you are going to be sadly mistaken and wrong. The U.S. has pivoted to China. Russia, the threat from Russia, and even the threat in the Middle East, and I've talked about it a little bit here, obviously, even those threats now are very much secondary to the threat from China as perceived by the Trump administration. The U.S. under the Trump administration, it was similar underneath the Biden administration, and perhaps if it had been a more coherent and focused administration, we would have had similar actions. The U.S. is not going to accept NATO as a collection of protectorates for which it pays the defense. NATO is finished, ladies and gentlemen. NATO is finished, sadly, and the country that needed it most is right here, our country called Canada, because we loved being captured in that network of the NATO alliance, being able to move about in it, balance the Goliath to our south with our friendships and part of the alliance in Europe. The British have a term, they say, hey, somebody is a swimmer, somebody is a drowner, and they intersect, put a second one in the middle called a bobber, or a third one called a bobber. And Canada was neither a swimmer in NATO nor somebody who drowned. But we'd go out, and every once in a while we'd get into something over our head, and we'd start to sink. But in order to keep us as part of the alliance, the Americans would come and prop us back up. And then we'd thrash around a bit more, and unfortunately, we got seen as weak. We are alone sitting on top of this Goliath. And in my view, on tariffs and all those things, of which I will not comment, is simply this. We need the United States of America. And we should think long about our relationship, because 50 years from now and 1,000 years from now, we are going to be here. We're not moving. And the United States is going to be there. And we're not going to be part of China, obviously. And we are not going to be part of the European Union. It is simply not going to work. So we should figure out our relationship with the United States in the longer term. And we need our leaders focused on that. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm all about East-West diversity in our trading. What I said to somebody in a radio interview a little while ago, you know something? For 75 years, we haven't done that. What makes us think that we can actually go ahead and do it right now and accomplish the things that we actually want to accomplish? We have to be careful that what we're saying we're going to do is not what we wish we could do. And we had to be very pragmatic and very practical about this. Throughout all of that, here's what I worry about, and I would caution and I would advise our leaders to be very careful on this, is that we are not at war with 335 million Americans in a trade war. We are in a trade war, perhaps, with the Trump administration, but we have 335 million Americans who, if they think about Canada at all, for the most part, think of us in the most kind, generous, compassionate terms and love having us as an alliance and a friend on their north. But we have to do better if we're going to keep them that way. On the domestic agenda of keeping the Americans on side, we've got to do better on the defense and security issues. Saying 2% from any political leader with a vague sort of plan or words about getting to there somewhere 5, 6, 8, 10 years out, we'll simply not do it. Talking about border control and reducing drug trade and people going across illegally, and then putting in 2 helicopters and 75 RCMP officers simply will not do it. We've got to change that. And having immigration protocols which don't do the job of assuring our safety and security, let alone that of the Americans who depend on us to do that, simply will not be enough. I mean, I don't, whatever your view is on bringing in 5,000 people from Gaza, could be 100% supportive, 100% against. That's not the issue. The issue is we do not have the capability to be able to screen 5,000 immigrants from Gaza and confirm for ourselves, confirm for our 41 million Canadians that they are indeed the kind of people we want to be part of our nation and not radicalized Hamas supporters or indeed terrorists themselves. You know, the hatred that we ignore across our country, thank you for that, the hatred that we ignore across our country becomes a standard that we accept. And I watched, I was appalled as I watched the hatred explode after 7 October 2023, and then realized that, yeah, this is the standard now that we have across Canada. And so what I do is I ask you to act. Allies for a Strong Canada just ask you 5 or 6 really simple things. Number 1, speak up. Now is the time. Take that Vimy courage, that those 100,000 men who went up Vimy Ridge that day, tuck it in your belly, and when you see that hatred out there, you speak up and make sure that people know that you believe this is unacceptable. Just think for a second. If we were denying access to our college campuses to Black Canadians, to Indigenous Canadians, to other folks who are readily identifiable, how incensed we would be. Every single political leader in our nation would be there to start with, and we would have an entirely different response. Speak up. Speak up now. Go on social media. Go on radio talk shows. You're all leaders. Everybody is a leader in our great nation. And speak up now and make sure that folks understand that this is not acceptable. This is not our Canada, and we are not taking that as the norm, as a standard as of right now. Influence, second part, influence political leaders and those who want to be political leaders. Make sure we pinhole them. Go to their rallies, ask them the questions, put the questions online, ask the members of Parliament and those who are running to be members of Parliament. I see Kevin Vong is over here, one of my personal heroes for his courage. Kevin, you're just an awesome guy. Be a Kevin Vong. Get out there, ask those questions, and let people know that the hatred is unacceptable. And what are you as a member of Parliament? What are you as a potential Prime Minister going to do about it? Tell me now, tell the nation. Don't try to waffle around it and please every single person. Pressure the authorities outside of the political leaders themselves. I'm talking about pressure. I put mayors in those terms of, as authorities. Pressure the mayor of Ottawa. Pressure the mayor of Toronto. Pressure the Police Services Board. Pressure the chiefs of police of Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto and Winnipeg and those other places which let those demonstrations, the pro-Hamas, pro-hatred demonstrations take place, shut down either the core of our cities or the core of our universities. Pressure them to go out and do their job. We don't need more laws. We've got lots of regulations, lots of laws to condemn hatred, to stop people from disturbing our society in an appropriate manner, and all we need to do is enforce the ones that we have. That would be the 4th thing I'd say. Make sure they understand we want them to enforce our laws. And the last sort of 2 points I would say is this. Correct those people in public who speak up and get it wrong. And whether they're saying that Israel is at fault, or that the law of war doesn't cover defending yourself when you're being attacked in your home, or the fact that genocide is taking place in Gaza, which it is not, correct them at every opportunity you get, right from the time they say those things, and make sure that disinformation and those kinds of views are seen as unacceptable. And last thing I would say to you, as a Canadian who worries about what is going to happen to our nation if this hatred continues, because it will rip us apart as a country, is show up. Show up when there are threats to the 400,000 Jewish Canadians in their synagogues, in their neighborhoods, in the places where they go to school, in their businesses. Show up. Be there in their neighborhoods to let them know that we're with them. Go to their synagogues. I've been to several. To show up and say, I'm here with you. Go to their businesses and give them the business and help them understand that, yes, we are with them. And pressure and show up and be there, because presence is so powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end right there and say simply this. Those incredible Canadians who went to World War I, incredible Canadians, World War II, Korea, operations ever sent, the ones that I've ever since, the operations and those incredible people, Canada's sons and daughter I got to serve with and command and had the pleasure of it. We had certain values that we believe in. And we had those values handed to us by our predecessors, in uniform and out. And I would say simply this: when you go to Vimy Ridge, almost every single Canadian who goes there has the most inspirational and encouraging experience of a lifetime. And almost every single Canadian goes from there to the fields of Flanders. And you go to the surgical center where Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, when he was so tired and exhausted and almost beaten down because of the death of a close friend, on top of the deaths of thousands of others during that April 1915 gas attack stood out and wrote that incredible poem in Flanders Fields and said, "Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw, the torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields." I go to Flanders Fields, I look at those poppies, I look at the little cairn there with the poem written on it, I think about John McCrae, and I think about the 700,000 Canadians, the 400,000 who served in the First World War, the 66,000 plus who died, the 11,285 names of those who died that are listed on the Vimy Memorial, because we have no idea where their bodies are or we're able to identify them. And I realize they've offered us a torch based on their courage, based on their sacrifice, based on their values of believing that people are equal and that teams are powerful, and that as leadership stands up, we don't care who we are, we come in it together as Canadians. I challenge each one of you, take up that same torch. Speak up, show up, pressure, correct, and don't allow the violence that we've seen over this past year and a half to become the norm in Canada any longer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I wish you great success with your conference as we go forward. Thank you.